these next 3 months coming into October and the U.S. election are going to be insane.
Welcome back to LukeTheTrader, and today we have Tom Luongo here for an interview. So could you please introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm Tom Luongo. I'm the publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns family of media, be it the blog over at goldgoatsandguns.com or the monthly newsletter through the Patreon service or the podcast, which you can find just about everywhere, all under the same brand. And, my background, I started this as like Dave Collum. I'm a chemist first. Mm-hmm. And then slowly over the course of time, I just became, obsessed with monetary theory, economics, politics, and whatnot. And eventually it's 2024. So about 11 years ago, I got hired by Newsmax to write Gold Stock Advisor, as one of their newsletters at the time, and just kind of transitioned into this after my career as a chemist kind of hit the wall when you wake up one day and you're 42 and you're unemployed and you only have a bachelor's, and in America that makes you unemployable. So it was time for a career shift, and I'll be honest with you, I'm far happier doing this than I ever was doing that. Not that I didn't enjoy it. It's just, it's not hanging out. And let me put it this way. It's too early in the morning for me to be having a cigar, but I would, while we're doing this, but I would much rather breathe that in than the crap I used to breathe in the various laboratories that I worked in for 20 years. So there you go.
Yeah, it's pretty toxic there as well. Yeah,
it's especially in what I did. I did like metals chemistry and whatnot. So it's all nitric acid and hydrogen, and it was just awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just because you're also leaning sort of into the politics and looking into that, like how much do you factor in the geopolitics in your investment decisions? And perhaps because you're also sort of known for looking into gold, how do you see gold at the moment?
Sure, that's a big question to unpack. The best way to describe my evolution is to say I started off literally as a gold guy. I got hired to do Gold Stock Advisor, and all I really understood back in 2013 when I got hired by Newsmax was I understood gold, and I thought I understood gold, and then as that job went along and the gold bear market continued on for the next year and a half, and I found myself, consistently on the wrong end of a lot of things. And here I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this going, well, I've taken this turn here. If I don't get better at this, if I don't up my game, I'm going to be out of this business really quickly, and I'm going to be back to, digging ditches or selling my body for science or something. I don't know. So, and believe me, there's not much to, anybody really wants to study here. So I had to really start thinking about it. And at the same time, the geopolitics really became an issue. And for the 2 years previous to that, I was working behind the scenes with a broker over in Vietnam. And he taught me a lot of things about how to read a balance sheet and how to, do market assessments. I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, mostly under a pseudonym, mostly under his name. But what happened was during that time while studying with him in Vietnam, we're now studying the whole Southeast Asian complex. And so the beginnings of real geopolitics for me, was also there as I watched the U.S. try to stop China from building a pipeline across Myanmar. And I started to watch, so invariably at the end of the day, my natural training in board games and strategic assessment of multivariate analysis that comes from both being a chemist and an inveterate gamer, I think just eventually took over. And so geopolitics is today far more important to me than everything else. I don't think that markets anymore care about profit and loss. I think they care from a traditional balance sheet sense, or for traditional, what does the consumer actually want sense. I think 90% of what we're seeing today, and I mean 90%. I used to think it was 50, then 70. I'm 90% of what decisions that companies make today are geopolitically motivated, either geopolitics and or domestic politics. I think that they're more worried about what the central bank's going to do. Once you understand what you think the central bank's going to do, then you have to understand the politics of the central bank. Then you got to break each of the central banks down by their imperatives and their incentives and where they fit in the geopolitical picture. And then this is why my commentary and my thought process has evolved to the way where it has today, which I think, honestly is a unique thing in the space. It doesn't mean that there aren't deficiencies to that model and to that framework, but as a newsletter editor now, both for both Newsmax and Independent with Gold, Goats, and Guns, I've got two separate portfolios behind a paywall that are both doing more than 20% on an annualized basis. So I must be doing something right. And 7 out of 10 picks are positive. And generally speaking, 7 out of 10 picks are positive within a year. So I must be doing something right with this framework. It wasn't working the other way at all. I distinctly remember having a crisis point in late 2015, trying to figure out what was going to happen next, because at that time I was a massive dollar bear, for example. And I finally just kind of looked up and went, no, this is not working. And if I don't get this one right, if I don't make a fundamental, if I don't accept the fact that I'm wrong in the next 3 months worth of issues, I'm going to be out of this job pretty quickly. And then, so the market invariably will kick your ass, as often as it needs to in order for you to finally get your head screwed on straight. So
now I'm sort of a more traditional investor, more balance sheet, income statement, and so on. And I'm just trying to sort of understand your framework. So when you assess for geopolitical events, how are you making sure that you're not being swayed by bias? Because there's a lot of fake information out there, social media, it's all sort of screwing up, making up a narrative that sometimes doesn't exist or is perhaps exaggerated.
No, that's a great question. And it's a one I wasn't expecting. So cool. Let's talk about this. Let's break that down. How do I know my bias isn't taking over? Well, that's part of what you remember. I wasn't just a chemist. Okay, I was a research and I was a research chemist in many ways, and so I have a really good ability to compartmentalize my analysis. So I can set up a boundary condition to a problem, much like a first semester physics lecture. If you've ever taken college physics, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They set up a thought problem, then they derive an equation, then they build off that equation, then they move on to the next model, and the next model, and the next model. But it's all very compartmentalized because the universe in that thing is this chalkboard and nothing else. So that's the first thing you do. Second thing you do is you realize that the Austrians are right about just about everything except about timing. And that's a real, and I mean that fundamentally. Like I think the Austrians, there are some criticisms of Austrian economics that are subtle and worthwhile to discuss. But compared to Keynesianism, compared to monetarism, compared to Samuelsonianism, compared to Marxism, compared to all these other economic isms, none of which are actually valid, because none of which are actually valid attempts at building a social science. Or which I hate that phrase because it's an oxymoron, building, or at least admitting that economics is a social science as opposed to a hard science. When you understand that economics is not about numbers, it's never been about numbers. Economics is about blood. I realized this ages ago. The economics is not about the balance sheet. It's not about the P&E. It's not about the bond equation or the Black-Scholes equation or anything else. It's not. I mean, eventually it reduces to that. It reduces, and sometimes it helps as a framework for your decision. But I don't think it's about that at all. I think
just trying to. Sorry to interrupt you. Just trying to understand you. Do you mean more of like the origin to where it leads to that you're sort of talking about?
So I'll get there. So what I mean by this is that. Bias is inherent. We all have biases. You either lean into your bias and then allow that bias to tell you whether or not you're on the right path or not, because the market will eventually tell you you're on the right path. Like at the end of the day, all that matters is performance. I've been on the right side now and because I don't publish these numbers and I don't talk about them in interviews and whatnot, but I'm dead serious when I say we're at issue 83 coming up with the Gold Goats and Guns newsletter, and I have an annualized return rate across the entire portfolio. That includes like small stocks that are 90% losers. That's 18.9%. Okay, over 7 years. I don't know who else has given out 18.9% over 7 years, but my bias, whatever it happens to be, must be correct. And so if the markets if I'm not correct in the long run, if my bias is miscalibrated with reality, then it's going to show up in my performance as a stock picker, portfolio designer, however you want to put it. So I think that I should be able to put those numbers up against just about anybody else in the world, and I've got the spreadsheet to prove it. So how do you account for bias? There's two things. Well, that I did all that, and then I'm going to reduce it to something very simple. Assume they're lying to you, and then backfill and prove that they're not. If you assume everybody is lying to you in the markets, the media, the politicians, central bankers, and everybody else, if you assume they're all liars, you're going to be right 75% of the time. You'll be wrong 25% of the time, but I don't know of a better edge in the market than that one. I've looked for market edges everywhere in my life. I do mostly quantitative style technical analysis. I don't use traditional TNA at all. I don't use moving averages or Bollinger Bands or Ichimoku clouds or any of this. I know how to trade all that stuff. I think it's all literal freaking shamanism at this point. All we know is open, high, low, close, and the probability of breaking a previous high or a previous low, and everything else,
and volume perhaps,
and volume, and maybe volume by price, right? Histograms of volume by price, and everything else. I'm sorry. It's just, I mean, I hope it works for people. And I know it works for certain people. Like I know there are very successful traders out there that use trend lines and channels and all this stuff and Fibonacci series. And at times I think those are very good edges, but I don't think they're quantifiable at all. And because they're not quantifiable, they're not knowable. Then they're all, at the end of the day, second, third, fourth, fifth derivatives in the mathematics sense of the data. And then therefore they get into art. And really what you're doing, the reason they work for you is because you do this over and over and over again. You've trained your brain to see patterns that are there, and then the lines on the charts or whatever it is that you've done just remind you of, okay, well, that kind of worked in the past. And you, at the end of the day, you still wind up using your instinct to act rather than a system. But the only other person I know that has a quantitative system that I reasonably trust is my friend Alex Craner, who also has a quantified trend following analysis structure. And his model isn't very much different than mine. I just look for, I just break markets down into the three basic states. They're either consolidating, they're trending up, or they're trending down. They're not doing anything else. They're either trending or they're reversing. Sorry. I mean, they're either consolidating, trending, or reversing. Like those are the three states of the market. Everything else is just noise. And if you break it down to if you break your analysis down, and you use your TA as a confirmatory signal to what you think you're seeing in the political realm, that marriage between those two things, unbelievably powerful. Like I can literally read a weekly candlestick chart of gold or the 10-year German Bund or, and I can correlate that with events that have happened in time. The other day for my patrons in one of my market reports, I said, I mean, I have a whole bunch of these historic charts of like events where they, just putting like, oh, here's a turn, like taking 15 years worth of a market and then correlating it to major events and going, okay, here's one. And I do it across all these markets. The other day I did this for 4 different countries, 5-year credit default swap prices. And I tied them all to the Bank of England. And it wasn't hard once you start like working the framework out. It was like, this is what's happening here. So, and you could see it from that perspective. So the bias is, you have to embrace your bias, Then you have to distrust it. Then you have to verify it. And but if you start with the fact that we live in the most corrupt age in 300 years of human history, then you assume that everybody in politics is lying to you. And honestly, isn't that the way you're supposed to, like, you're supposed to assess if you're a stock analyst and, you sit down and listen to the quarterly report, are you supposed to sit there and trust that the CEO is telling you the truth? Or are you supposed to verify? No, of course not. So just distrust.
Continuous reevaluation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In this sense. Yeah. And now within your framework, is this sort of something you can only apply to a certain part of the market, or can you see it sort of being applied in all different kinds of sectors? So would you say that your framework is sort of universal or more of a certain niche?
Well, Lucas, the problem with that is that because of where I sit in the marketplace with my bias and with my framework, I only really look at the most important strategic markets in the world. Like if I wanted to make my life easy, I'd go into like consumer defensive stocks and be really boring and no one would listen to me. Right? Because they're easy. There you can do PD, balance sheet. I mean, I could sit there and we could break for like J&J or Nestle or any of those stocks. And I used to do this. I used to break those stocks down. And I actually have I almost bring that up because I kind of like those stocks as countercyclicals, right? But is it universal? No, because the farther you get away from the center of power, the less effect the geopolitics has. So you have to. So I sit at the intersection of where the most difficult markets to handicap are, right? And because, of course, like anything else, if you're thinking about what it is that you do, what is your business? Well, your business, the unique selling proposition is that you're the guy who could talk about all of the markets that confuse everybody else. Why does gold do what it does? Why does the bond market act this way? Why does this? Why is this? Why is this? Why is that? And, I learned I learned at the knee of Murray Rothbard very, very well. And he said, he stressed USP over and over again, unique selling proposition over and over and over again. The only way a new entrant comes into the marketplace and is successful is that they have a unique selling proposition. If you don't have that, if you're just competing on price, you've got nothing. And so, for me, it was early on, it was very obvious that that's where I had an interest, where my personal mission as a person was leading me. And then all I had to do was figure out how to craft a business around it. And then realize that if I could find the audience, well, then we would be fine. So it's kind of a meta-analysis. Talking about Gold, Goats, and Guns itself is also talking about why to answer your question, it's a meta-analysis of my own business is also applicable to the markets that I focus on. When you really ask me what I do every day, I sit down and I get a snapshot of like the 10 or 12 most important markets in the world. And then I look at the headlines and then I just stay in the moment and I let my spidey sense tell me what's going to happen next. And I'm like, and I don't stop to second guess it either. Right. Every time I do not stop to second guess it. And, when I get discordant information, that's when I usually stand up, sit back and go, okay, now what? But for example, I was not surprised at all by the French elections. Everybody else was. I wasn't. I wasn't surprised about the UK elections. Nope. Wasn't surprised that Joe Biden shot the bed during the debate. And now the Democrats are all turning on each other, trying to figure out what to do next. I also think at the same time that, for example, that the whole thing with Joe Biden was completely planned. But, whether or not they're going to be able to execute the whole plan, that's a different story. That's still up in the air. Those things are still what's up in the air. So, and then understand, how does that have an effect on markets? Right? Well, how does Joe Biden being revealed to be a mushroom to 3 billion people, how does that affect markets? Well, it's certainly going to freeze any capital that would be flowing into the United States, especially when it's happening on the day of the NATO summit in DC, when Europe is trying to present a united front politically. These are when you understand all that, then you can start asking yourself, okay, so how are they going to react to this? How are they going to react to that? What are they going to do to manage the price of gold? What are they going to do to manage the bond markets? What are they going to do to manage the stock markets? Or are they even going to care? At some point, what market are they going to run out of money? At some point, they run out of money to like manipulate markets. What market can they not, or are they not, paying attention to? And for the last couple of months, that market's last 3-4 weeks has been oil. They've been controlling the gold price, been beating on the silver price, beating on the dollar, beating on the bond markets, trying to keep all those things in place and frozen the currencies, the bonds, and everything else. And oil is just like exploded $12 in 3 weeks. But makes sense because oil also had a massive net short position that was historic. So that was the one market they weren't going to be able to hold back because a net short position is going to be the ultimate it's the ultimate bullish signal, right?
So. When we talk a little bit about politics, at least nowadays, it seems like in mostly all of the Western developed countries, we get leaders that are getting older and older, and it seems like we don't get any new blood or perhaps competent leaders who are taking over. So why do you think is that? Like, why is that?
That's because the political architecture above what we call countries does not want anything to change. I'm going to make it really simple. This is an investment podcast. Klaus Schwab, and he's a figurehead, by the way, but Klaus Schwab invested a lot of money in Elizabeth Warren or Ursula von der Leyen or Christine Lagarde or Kaja Kallas or David Cameron or whomever, Tony Blair. He invested a lot of money in those people. Well, like any good investment, sometimes the time horizon to the investment, to the return on investment isn't a year or 2 years or 5 years. It's 30 years. It's over the accumulated lifespan of having your pet senator on the banking committee for 40 years, moving banking regulations in the United States into an equitable alignment with the communist banking system you have in Europe. Like it's an investment. And so they're not going to let that investment off the hook until they've wrung every, last dollar out of it. Because then you have to understand, well, why would they think that way? Well, it's because they're locusts. Because these people are colonialists in their thinking. They believe that the whole planet is theirs for the taking. And once you understand their mindset, once you understand who they are, what they believe, handicapping their actions is not hard at all. So what are they going to do to protect that investment? They're going to re-elections. They're going to
Macron in this sense,
like Macron or even in the UK. They're going to know the political calculus of the timing of when to have their pet, Rishi Sunak, for example, call for snap elections in Britain. If they had waited 2 more months, right? After, and they're going to put forth all of the escalations that are clearly on the table for the Russia-Ukraine conflict. If they were to have put those forward without putting Keir Starmer in charge with a massive majority and created the quote unquote emotional relief valve for a snap election, they had done that without the snap elections, Sunak's unpopular government would have fallen. And Nigel Farage would be prime minister by September. Timing matters. In July, you worked really hard for the Tory. You worked really hard to have Sunak destroy the Tories. So now you got to pay that off. So we put Starmer in power, who no one wants, no one likes, but doesn't matter. They're, labor voters they made the correct calculus that 35% of the British electorate wouldn't vote for any of the other parties. And that's all they cared about. And everything else, they would stage manage. And look at what they're doing in Germany. Like I read a report yesterday that AfD members are no longer allowed to own guns because they're a threat to German democracy. It's complete nonsense. Like, oh, we're going to just abrogate all of your right to defend yourself because you engage in political wrongthink. And this is protecting democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
And
I got that now. So, but that's what we're dealing with. So,
So do you think perhaps these old, let's say, institutional structures that we have are perhaps the reason why we see economic policies being rushed in the short term instead of looking out for the long term? Like, let's say ESG, for example, and all these policies, it is not structured to make a sustainable transition, but rather just rush to the goal as fast as possible and perhaps also break things. So,
well, it is. Okay. So I think what you're trying to get at, and this is something, a talking point of mine that's been, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that I've made in the past, which is that they're racing against the clock, that they have all these old people in place. They are running out of time. I mean, Dianne Feinstein finally died. She was probably dead 6 months before they ever announced that she was dead. Like, they denied for 3 years that Joe Biden is a mushroom, right? Same thing with Mitch McConnell. Like, Mitch just like kind of randomly like freezes up for 30 seconds during a press conference. And like, that's not that he shouldn't be shuffled off to the home. He still gets to be Senate minority leader. Are we kidding here? Right. So like, yes, they are desperately trying to push as much of this agenda, through as humanly possible in a very short period of time and remake as much of the world as possible in a very short period of time. It's a needle scratch kind of moment. And it's not going to work. This is why Klaus Schwab the other day had to come out and say, look, we have to force you to go along and eat the bugs and all of this stuff. We have to do this. You have to realize that we're your betters. And if we can't convince you of this, we're just going to force you into it. And I'm like, how delusional is this dude that he thinks he can move 7.5 billion people? I mean, I'm Italian. I'm at my core, I'm vaguely racist. Like, I don't understand the German mind. I just don't. I don't get it. Like, and like someone like, I mean, I understand what Klaus Schwab's motivations are. I just don't understand that someone that much of a control freak, how he like made it 82 when somebody didn't just like whack him upside the head with a 2x4. Like, seriously, like what the hell? I mean, he had to have been subsidized, right? He had to have been placed into power and given power, because he would have never accumulated it on his own, not with an attitude like that. I mean, I'm sorry, I've read my Andrew Carnegie, and that's the way you get ahead in this world. So, I mean, people call me a bully, for Christ's sake. I'm like, compared to what? Like, I don't want power. Like, but whatever, I am a bully. That's fine. But in comparison, like that's the that's the mindset that we're dealing with, and I don't know how how they think they're going to make that happen. How they're going to take this great reset, which has already failed, turn it into the great acceleration, along with the great demoralization, in order to still win. Like, what I see is all you have left is threatening us with nuclear war. And all that's going to do is break people out of the matrix that much faster. And then the global uprising against you will be even more profound in the long run. And it won't matter what elections you rig. It won't matter what currency markets you rig. Your opponents can see you. And now I'm talking specifically about the Russians and the Chinese and the Indians and the BRICS in general. They can see what's going on. They can see the cheap provocations for what they are. They can even take a punch in the mouth and have to lament and put into the ground, civilians who were sunning themselves in Sevastopol or going to a concert in Moscow. They will do so. They will shed a tear, and they will still not strike back, because they know striking back at these people is exactly what they want. We have not already had a nuclear exchange, because Vladimir Putin is not Hitler. That's the truth. And if any person other than Putin being in charge in Russia at this point we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be fighting for tins of sardines. And I'm dead serious when I say it.
And now, looking sort of a little bit more into economics again, and sort of a little bit more of a personal
Sure.
question in this sense. So why are you a fan of Austrian economics? As you already said that you preferred over the Keynesian model and all these other models that exist.
Because it's the only one that actually treats human beings as people. It's the only one that's attempting to talk about economics as a social science and not as some kind of, fake physical science. I'm a physical scientist. I know what the Gibbs free energy equation tells me. I can look up shit in the Janif tables. And if you don't know what the Janif tables are, and it's JANAF, please go do so. And then understand that that's what I used to do as an undergraduate, which is work with people who put data into that book. Okay? That's a hard science. Okay? That's a STEM field. That's reality. Economics is the study of human behavior. It's the study of human action, as Mises would like to put it. And you can have your arguments for or against praxis and praxeology. Fine, we can have. I'm not philosophically that hip to have that conversation, so I'm not going to. But I have people in my life who do. So I've heard these arguments. I'm not sure I'm convinced by them. It doesn't matter. But in comparison, by assuming ultimately at the end of the day, and by building up your model of an economic model through an a priori model based on the very simple precept that man acts with purpose, and you can derive everything else from that. Not man acts rationally, not man acts perfectly. Man acts with purpose to the best of his ability at that moment in time, given the information that that he has, and given all of his biases and all of his endocrinology and all of this, like all of it. And once you, and it's a kind of submission process, right? It's a kind of way of saying, look, I have to submit to this. I have to say, like, I don't know what your motivations are, Lucas. I don't know what my hell, on a good day, I barely even know what my motivations are. I mean, look, are you going to honestly ask yourself the question on every day when you wake up in the morning that you know what your plan is and you know what your life's going to look like and you know what you're going to have for dinner that evening and blah, 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 blah. Well, maybe you do. And maybe you're Klaus Schwab, right? You're blessed rage for order, Pale Ramon, from the most important line of Wallace Stevens, the idea of order at Key West, one of the greatest poems in the English language. Oh, blessed rage for order! Like how much more do you need to understand the control freak mindset than that? And the lament of that, when the truth of the matter is that the world is not what you want it to be. And no matter how much you try to rail against it, like reality is, for example, Austrian economics, at the end of the day, is the only economic school that says, you know what? I don't care what you said you wanted to do. This is what you did. You say, oh yeah, I really do want to get my kids the braces they need. And then you went to the liquor store and you spent the money on a bottle of Boone's Farm. Okay? That's what you did. Everything else is trying to interpret what people think they want. Austrians are like, this is what they did. And they're always going, and this is what they're going to do. I don't know. And it leads in a specific, and it leads ultimately to a rational understanding of interest rates, a rational understanding of the structure of production and how manipulate or how interfering in the natural decision-making process of human beings at the individual level has macro effects, and how eventually that system will collapse under, the system of intervention will eventually collapse under the weight of its own internal inconsistencies. What the Austrians have not done is accounted for the fact that man is even more clever than they think they are. Like the first generation Austrians had a real defect, I think, in their thinking because they didn't understand the Eurodollar system. They didn't understand the credit offshore dollar system. They only looked at things through a kind of Adam Smith wealth of nations domestic economy lens. And fair cop. These are very young ideas. That's not a statement of, that's not a derisive statement on my part. That's a, hey man, you got to build the model up bit by bit by bit. Like, again, to go back to the first semester physics lecture, or to invoke one of my favorite jokes of all time, the spherical cow. And if you don't know what that is, look it up on Wikipedia. You'll understand what I mean. Like as we've gone along, Austrian economics, cow has gotten less spherical and more cow-like. But the offshore dollar markets have really stumped them because they expected the world to collapse in the 1990s, and they were wrong. And then in 2008, and they were wrong. And in 2024, they're going to probably be wrong. But they're not wrong as to what's going to happen, just when it's going to happen. And then that's fine. Sharpen the pencil, understand where the informational and intellectual deficits are, not defects, deficits, what you don't know, and then go fill those things in, apply the filter to the world you have, and then see how successful you are. And then I'm going to bust my hand, patting myself on the back, going 18 to 19% annualized return with that filter, taking Austrian economics, marrying it to geopolitics, and then filtering through the Eurodollar system. And now I could pick any stock in a particular, as long as I know what sectors are going to do well. I can pick 2 or 3 leading stocks in that sector and do a real quick balance sheet and price analysis and chart analysis. Go, yeah, that one looks good. I don't know. That one's going to do well. It might not do the best in the entire sector, but I don't care. It's good enough. There's the theme. I'll go find 20 stocks that are better than that. And my community actually takes the themes that I give them. I say, hey, uranium's going to do well. Here's a stock. And then they go, well, what about these 14 uranium stocks? I'm like, those are clearly better. Maybe you should buy those. And I don't discourage them. I always say, like, the stocks that are in the portfolio are examples of stocks in those particular sectors that you want to be looking at. And when you look at those sectors, you're going to find in your deep dive of that sector with your filter and your different set of priorities, and maybe your different expertise. Because I have hedge fund managers and then guys like you like doing balance sheet analysis and going, yeah, these are better. I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you. You mind if I put it in the portfolio? And they're like, no, I'd be honored. I'm like, okay, cool. And then we do it, and then I write it up a few months later. Yeah. I have stocks in my portfolio that I literally only know about because of my people. But if you explain to them why a particular sector is going to be good, then you can let them do the work. And then you crowdsource the whole thing. And you don't have to be the smartest guy in your room. You just have to be smart enough to know that the room is smarter than you are.
So in this sense, also having a little bit of a humbleness in your framework, which also keeps you sort of achieving those higher returns in the long run, at least.
Oh, you have to. How many times do you have to go broke in the market before you finally figure out that you did it wrong?
Yeah.
In my case, that answer is twice, right? So, no, absolutely. You have to be humble in the face of your ignorance. We are all staggeringly ignorant about so many things. And every day I wake up and I go, okay, what don't I know? And that's why I spend the entire day, most of my day, assimilating information or inspiring people to assimilate information which they want to share with me. Then I don't have to go out and see the world or find the world. I have the world come to me. Now, does that come with a bias? Of course it does. Do I have to go out and, recalibrate my bullshit meter every once in a while? Absolutely. Do I have to tell them, no, that's the wrong interpretation of that particular thing because of this, and this? Yes, but thank you for bringing it to my attention. And, and the other thing I found over the years, Lucas, is and I never intended for this to happen. I always expected to have to just do all this work on my own. I never intended or expected that the community itself would become the thing that drives the bus. right?
Mm-hmm.
What I've found is the more I do that, the more I incorporate their ideas and their research and everything else into the conversation, which I then, bring forward into the world or give birth to into the world through my own my own analysis and synthesis of all that information. The more they're inspired to go out and look for more stuff. Because, dude, they've got a conduit. They've got someone who they respect, they can bounce ideas off of, who then treats them just like I know my patrons, especially the active ones, the really vocal ones and the active ones, are all really impressive people, like truly impressive people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, and if you take you walk into the conversation, which, believe me, I have to work very hard at to, Jordan Peterson would always say, for example, that, always go into a conversation assuming the other guy knows something you don't, right? Well, go in with that assumption and you probably learn something. You go in thinking you know everything. Well, then you wind up with Klaus Schwab and David Cameron and all the other people. But if you go in with a reasonable amount of humility, then, you're going to learn something and it's going to be like, ooh, that's good. I like that. And I'm always very encouraging to people to like throw ideas out there. Sometimes I may be, sarcastic or dismissive, but that's okay. I'm also sarcastic and dismissive. So it all depends on the mood and how much coffee I've had. But what it is. So, but yeah, you have to be humble and at the same time a little arrogant. I mean, you have to straddle the line between both of those states. You have to be strong enough in yourself and your position to be able to state it forthrightly, and argue it to death and argue it to as hard as you can, but also be willing to be wrong. And if you're wrong, you admit it and then you move on with your life. And we train our politicians wrong, we train our business leaders wrong, we train everybody wrong. We train everybody to never show weakness, to never admit that you were wrong, except when you're supposed to do the struggle session after you've been caught lying. And then you're going to be moved out to pasture. And that's the political side of things. No, you should always just go and, look, I could be wrong about this. But and understand that training, that mechanism, that framework, whatever you want to call it, that only attracts one type of person. The kind of person who never admits that they're wrong. What do we call those people? We call them narcissists. Okay, we call them psychopaths. That's why our governments are staffed to the gills with psychopaths and narcissists. Okay, and head narcissists recruit beta narcissists to, run roughshod over the world. And the rest of us are like, what's wrong with you people? I'm like, duh. And there we are. Like, and that's it. So, when you don't act like that, you're a breath of fresh air. This is one of my problems. Thinking about it, this is one of the defects I think that Donald Trump has, is that he hates to admit and won't admit that he's wrong.
Yeah.
He just changes his mind and never says, yeah, I was wrong about that. We're going to do this now. You know how much more credibility he would actually have with people if he would get over himself and just admit that, yeah, I was wrong, but we're going to do this now. Because he's of that mindset of you never show weakness. Like, yeah, you do. Like, it's dumb. Don't do that. Like, come in and kvetch a little bit. It doesn't, it's not a bad, the water's fine. No one's going to hate you for it. Admit you were wrong, show a little humility, move on with your life. And let's get the next one together. Let's figure out the next problem and solve the next problem together. So,
as we're sort of at the end of our interview, is there anything that you want to perhaps remark or highlight?
Yeah, I absolutely would. And that is that these next 3 months coming into October and the U.S. election are going to be insane. And I don't know what form or shape that's going to take, I have my theories. Those theories could be wrong. I don't need to, go into them in chapter and verse, but understand that all the things we talked about today,
Mm-hmm.
the creeping dread of acceleration of the old, colonialist control freaks running out of time, and we seeing them for what they are, and the rank and kind of ham-fisted manipulations they do of both the markets and our perception of politics and our political systems. All that's coming to an end, and they know it,
Mm-hmm.
and that means that they're a cornered animal. And what do we know about cornered animals? That's when they're most dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And they put themselves in the corner. They retreated to the corner, and they like their corner. Okay, they do, and what we've seen is that's where they think they can retreat to, and then blackmail us with the ultimate threat, and say, look, if you don't give us what we want, we're just going to burn the world down.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't care. This is what we want. They're not the Joker who wants to burn the world down simply because he wants to see the world burn. They were threatened to burn the world down because they need to control it. Okay. And frankly, they all need to be shuffled off the stage and sent to a home where they can control, I don't know, their little HOA or the mental institution. We just need to send it. They need to be sent to the Fletcher Memorial Home, which is the Pink Floyd song from the Final Cut. If you haven't, it's just, as we were talking about this, I'm like, oh, right, we need to send them to the Fletcher Memorial Home for the mental institution for tyrants and kings, and let them all just play their little games. Let them all play their little games without frontiers, as Peter Gabriel said. So that's what I would. This is me and my Gen X music. History coming through. That's what we need to do, but we're not there yet. And they're going to resist going to the home as much as possible. It includes the intelligence services. It includes MI6 and the Mossad and CIA and all the intelligence agencies and all of that stuff. They're literally freaking out right now because they don't know how they're going to win this election in the fall, which is why they're trying to get rid of Joe Biden. So that's a good sign. We've never seen them like this before, but their next move on the game board is to flip the table. And so let's hope let's hope I'm wrong about that one. There are many things in this life I hope I'm wrong about, and this is one of them.
I really appreciate that you took your time off your day, and I also just I always like listening to sort of differentiated opinion and differentiated approaches, because it's also a big learning outcome, right? That's how you progress as a human, by listening to people that think differently, that act differently, and just to sort of broaden your, I guess, spectrum, right? In this sense. So thanks for your time,
I
Tom.
agree. Thank you, Lucas. It was fun. I appreciate it.